All right, I think we're ready to talk about StepUp Oklahoma. Let's have Charlie get up here on the hot seat with me. So StepUp Oklahoma is divided into two sections. I printed off this for you, Charlie, so you can see their different talking points. And there's two groups of reforms that they're suggesting. Well, one is they're saying, here's some things we want to do to reform government. And then over here they're saying, here are things we want to do to enhance revenue. Okay, those are the two different sections. We're going to look at the revenue enhancements first, aka taxation, and then we're going to look at the reforms. But first, let me speak generally in broad terms about principles first. This is not an all or nothing plan, and all it really is a list of suggestions. To enact any of these things will require particular bills or joint resolutions on each particular topic. So it's not all or nothing. And already we see legislators beginning to file bills that address points of this. So it's not all or nothing. We will have to be diligent like we always are to watch the bills that come out in the specific language and find out what's going on. And also, sometimes there's no specificity in these suggestions. It's just a general, hey, let's reform this. But they don't say what they mean by that. Really, it's all about taxation. And the other stuff, I believe, is just kind of window dressing to help you feel good about it. It's the idea of taking garbage and putting it next to something that looks attractive that you like and hoping that you swallow a little bit of the garbage with it. Like we have this little debate that we get into around the campfire with my friends. How much crap are you willing to eat in a good brown brownie? How much fudge, how much brownie do you just go ahead and eat with a little bit of poop in it? That's what they're trying to do to us. Okay, now before we dive into this,
I hope you're done with your lunch.
They were mostly finished with their Mexican food.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
They're Mexican brownies.
Now normally, I think it would be easy for us to just say, taxation's bad, okay? We don't need to do it. But I'm finding that more and more people are just clueless. We've lost the idea that taxation is bad. And I watched Kevin Stitt last night at Canadian County, and he views taxation as sort of a market environment where the government of Oklahoma needs to compete in the taxing market and be competitive with other states in the region. Like, he doesn't even talk about taxation being inherently or fundamentally bad. He says, well, if Texas is taxing something that we're not, well, then we could do what they're doing and have more revenue. Or if Texas is not taxing something and we are, then maybe we need to reduce it to be more competitive with Texas. But he's all about trying to get every dollar we can get. And he doesn't even know how to talk about taxation as bad. So let's just talk about the concept of what's yours, mine, and ours for a minute. You own your body. And I think most of us would say slavery is absolutely morally wrong. You should not be forced to labor for another person against your will. When you look at the basis of our civil society commandments, specifically commandments 6 through 10, you should not murder, you should not commit adultery, you should not steal, you should not bear false witness, and you should not covet the things that are your neighbor's. These are absolute universal principles on which all good law codes have ever been built. Don't kill people and steal their stuff. Okay? So it starts with self-ownership. Slavery is wrong. It's the same reason that conscription is wrong. But where people start to lose the philosophical understanding is when we start getting to more material things, like what's in your pocketbook. Sometimes people don't make the connection that the things that you work for to produce, the goods of your labor, are also just as much yours as your very body and self and your labor. They're an extension of you, and you own them. So just a quick example of several different things that we could maybe understand. Let's say you have a little garden in your backyard, and you're raising a ton of tomatoes, and your neighbor's not, but your neighbor likes your tomatoes. Well, your neighbor ought to be able to hand you $5 a week for as many tomatoes as he wants, and that's a private contract between you and him, and you trade what is yours to your neighbor with something that's his. Now, you would probably bristle up at the idea of having to take 50 cents or $1 of every $5 every week and take it down to the tax commission to help fund state government, wouldn't you? What if at the end of the season you wanted to sell your neighbor your rototiller because you're tired of gardening and now he wants the garden? So you sell him the rototiller for $50. Do you want to take $5 of that $50 and go drop it off at the tax commission? What about your old Chevy? Should you be able to sell it to your neighbor for $1,000 without taking $100 down to the tax commission after that transaction? See, when you keep it small like that, I think we understand that, well, that's theft. They have no business getting involved in that transaction. That's just outright theft. Furthermore, they do it under threat of violence. They're forcing you to give that stuff up. So I think if you have a Christian worldview and you understand private property and what theft is, you understand that all taxation is fundamentally legalized theft, and it's morally wrong. The only moral way to fund something is through a user fee. You know, a really good example of that, just to help wrap our heads around it, is public roads. I think we all want public roads so that we can get our goods and services to market and get from point A to point B. Now, obviously, there's a very complex way in which our roads are funded. But fundamentally, today, the way our system works is if you want to drive on the road, you're probably going to need gasoline to drive on it. So when you buy gasoline, there's a gas tax that helps fund the roads. Now, obviously, there's other revenue streams in there, and get involved. But basically, it's kind of like a user fee. You pay to use the roads, and you control that. You don't use them, you don't pay for that. And so that is a more fair, equitable, and moral way to do it. But the idea that government can come and say, oh, you have something? Let me take some of it because I want to, or else. It's just morally wrong. And most of the guys running to be our next governor don't even understand that basic philosophy. So now as we start to look at the StepUp Oklahoma plan, it's all about taxes. So the first thing they propose, of course, is the cigarette tax. And other tobacco. They want to tax them all. So again, it's morally wrong for them to do it. And then it's extremely unfair in that it picks on people with low income who we know statistically do more of the smoking. So it's a sin tax. We're going to punish them for a certain behavior, tell them what they can and can't do, like a nanny state, and all they really want is the money. Do you want to say anything about that one before we go on to the next one?
Many people want it raised because every time it goes up, less people smoke. And so many people want it raised to cause fewer and fewer people to smoke. Of course, when that happens, fewer and fewer people smoke, it doesn't generate as much income for the state because even though you've raised it considerably, it may go down. Now, it will increase the amount of revenue going to the state, but not as high, not the projections that they're saying, 125 million or whatever it is. I forget what it is. So that's the interesting dichotomy. They want the money. John is so right off of that. But the reality of it is there's a good segment out there really want people to quit smoking. And there is, in a welfare society, which we live in, there is a tremendous amount of cost, healthcare cost as a result of smoking that everyone in this room picks up. And again, it's how the money's spent, to me, is more important than how it's collected. So,
there's always an argument. They want the money. The argument is, well, these smokers cost us money. But no one ever begs the question if taxation is morally right or wrong at the outset, or should we even be funding their health care? There's so many false assumptions there. I think it's dangerous for us to argue based on return on investment, the most good for the most people. Oh, this is good. If it's all about just dollars and cents and what's more beneficial as we count these beans versus these beans, we'll end up losing because they have the media ability to sell whatever statistical lie they want to and outspeak us. We need to claim the moral high ground and say, you need to stop punishing these people for doing this. They have a right to do what they want with their bodies, and if they want to kill themselves, that's up to them. We shouldn't be getting in there and just stealing from them until they kill themselves. We talked about, motor fuel tax. If we tax gas and diesel, okay, again, I think that is a proper way to fund government, but you're going to extraordinarily harm our competitive ability in the market. And they like to tell you, this is only going to cost you a few cents at the pump. Yes, but you're driving up the cost of everything in the market because everything's being transported by diesel. Even stuff on a train is using diesel. and natural gas fuel and so forth. Everything goes up when you tax gas, and we need to be competitive. So I think we can blow past that one because I want to get to some of these more interesting ones. They're talking about gaming modernization. And so what they want to do here is just expand the way that casinos can offer more ways to gamble. And it's all about the money. They just want more money. When you give government more money, it spends it and it grows government. Another one of the reforms they're talking about is creating sort of a new equalization fund or slush fund. They want to have this giant escrow account to help us get through downtimes. We have enough history to know that when you create an account and put a pile of cash in it, it never just sits there. They use it to play shell games, and they use it to grow programs. Even when we did a good thing by creating a Roads and Bridges Highway Fund and built that up, they just steal from it all the time and move it over to do other things. I don't even think they bother to put IOUs in there.
Let me address that. And we actually have two funds already in the state of Oklahoma. The one they're proposing, it may be somewhat different in its methodology, but it's not different than the one that John Michael Roberts from Lawton sponsored 2 years ago and got passed. But let's look, now you talk about immorality here. When government has slush funds, which the first one we have is called the Rainy Day Fund, and the second one is this other fund that John Michael Roberts. What the government is doing is storing taxpayers' money. They're storing it. Now, would you rather government store it for an eventual use, or would you rather keep your own taxpayer dollars? I'm with that. I will say this on a rainy day fund, and it used to be robbed regularly until they passed the law probably 10 years ago to greatly reduce the amount that can be taken out at any given time. And I will say this also, a rainy day fund for emergencies I'm not opposed to necessarily. For example, when you have a raging grass fire in Oklahoma, and the only way to get that thing put out is with airdrops and other things like that, which become very expensive, then how are you going to pay for that? You're either going to have an emergency appropriation for that, or you pull that out of the rainy day fund. And I'll also say that all of our opposition to increased bonded indebtedness through the past years was because they had several $100 million sitting in the emergency fund. And things like repairing the Capitol needed to be done. Things like building a new ME's office needed to be done. So our position was, you got the money on hand, pull it out and use it for vital infrastructure that needs to be done. But they didn't want to do it that way. They wanted to borrow money and keep that there for a downtime that we have right now. And remember, downtimes are the only time that we start seriously evaluating the efficacy of government programs. The only time we seriously determine, do we really need to be doing this as government? And is there corruption in there? Is there waste? That's the only time we ever start looking for these things. When there's plenty of money going around, they never have to sweat it out, is when all those things grow and breed and foster. So I'm really against this fund they're talking about. I'm against the thing that John Michael Roberts talked about. I'm not so much against the original rainy day fund as long as that has a cap and it's kept a reasonable size, not for downturns, but for emergencies. Like a bridge going out, for example, if ODOT doesn't have the money for it, you know.
You know, the concept is that if government were lean and trim and all it did was protect life and property and provide for roads and courts and prisons and so forth, it wouldn't matter. It wouldn't matter what the price of oil did. We would be able to fund something like that, but they never even talk about taking us back to that form of government, proper government. They're also proposing an income tax increase on everybody. When you look at it, if you earn $12,000 to $26,000, it goes up. $26,000 to $50,000 goes up. $50,000 to $150,000 goes up. $150,000 to $1 million. Everyone's income tax would go up if they get this provision of this plan. Now, there's several reforms I want to talk about in a minute, from education lieutenant governor, budget office, several different things here. But it's not as important as understanding the gross production tax. So we'll get to this if we have time, because I think these are things we should talk about. We have 22 minutes left, but I want Charlie to take us through what's going on with why they would want to increase the gross production tax, because that seems like you got all these oil men saying, yes, let's raise it up. Why would they want to raise it up? So give us the full story on that, Charlie.
Yeah, okay. And to set that up, let me just say this. How many of you, if I saw a show of hands in here today, believe that the national economy is increasing primarily because of the switch over from the Obama administration, which was hostile to business, to now the Trump administration, which is very favorable to business? How many of you think the economy is improving because of that scenario I just related? Okay. Now, all Trump's done is something very simple. Very simple. He's lowered the cost of doing business. And he's done it in two ways. The first way, as he says, may be more important than the second, is he has gone in there and slashed regulations like you can't believe. You ask any businessman, and regulations are costly to business. So he's gone in there, and executive power, he's done that. Then with the passage of this tax reform bill, whatever you want to call it, the most important part of that was reducing our corporate income tax from 35 down to 20 or 21%, whatever it was. And all of a sudden, you have dramatically reduced the cost of doing business. Now, recently in the Oklahoman, there was an article with an interview of two relatively new businessmen to the state of Oklahoma. These aren't huge employers. We're probably looking at 20 to 35, 40 employees right now, but they have the chance to grow. Both of them, one of them in the article said, I could have located this business on either coast, but I chose Oklahoma because of not only overall lower cost of business, but lower cost of living. And the other one was a similar thing. In other words, the environment here was favorable to a business doing success. What StepUp Oklahoma is doing, getting ready to do and trying to do, and also what our legislature has been doing, is increasing the cost of doing business in Oklahoma and increasing the cost of living here. Rather than going in, as Dan Fisher says, we've got about $16 billion a year. Only about 6 of that is appropriated, but about the cost of government in Oklahoma is about $16 billion a year. How many of you believe there's at least 10% waste in all the agencies out there? And everybody raises their hand, and most people say, I think there's more. So if you eliminated that waste through auditing everything, finding out where the problem is, and then going in there, eliminating the corruption, the waste, and the duplication, and the mission creep that's in there, all of a sudden you've got an additional $1.6 billion. Wow. Now that's how you do it. But you'll never do it as long as you keep pumping more money in there. Now, I'm going to get to gross production tax. For those of you that may not know this, there are now 3 oil and gas organizations. And I could tell you what the names of them are here, but it'll be easier to understand if you realize that there's 2 of them that are primarily populated by the horizontal fracking boys. Horizontal is the word to understand here. And one of them, which is brand new, by the smaller vertical producers. And these guys have been at odds now for the last 4 years. A serious battle at the Capitol. And in fact, just 4 years ago, the big boys and the little boys were all together. So some of the big boys pulled out, created a new organization. Now the little boys have pulled out and created a new. So that's why we have 3 of them. So here's the thing. In the past, our gross production tax in Oklahoma has been 7%. And when you were a small vertical producer, your costs were much lower, and you could handle that amount of money. But then these horizontal boys come along, and the cost of drilling a well like that is much, much more expensive. So to encourage that type of drilling in its infancy 10 years ago or so, they reduced the gross production tax to only 1% for the first, I'm not even sure how long. And so here you had the vertical boys paying 7 and the horizontal boys paying 1. Today, 80% of all exploration is now the horizontal boys. And so they've all agreed you don't need this special incentive to do this 1% anymore. So they changed the law about 3 or 4 years ago to make it 2% for everybody for the first 3 years, and then it would kick up to 4%, maybe 7% for the vertical boys. They played with these numbers a lot in here. What people don't know is most wells, the majority of the oil or gas is depleted out of those wells within the first 3 to 4 years. So they get past that time, and then when they start paying the higher tax, there's actually less money that you have to pay. So the battle between the two has been this. The horizontal boys have wanted to drill longer laterals, 2, maybe 3 mile long laterals. And they've wanted to do it different strata. At the original strata in the sandstone that they used to be in, that was fine with the small vertical boys. It didn't interfere with them. But now they start doing these other stratas, and what's happening is they are boring through wells that the small vertical boys have already spent their money going out and discovering that pool of water and producing, and they're blowing right through there and taking their oil from them. That's called theft. And on top of that, because of the high pressure fracking that's going on, sometimes they're blowing their wells out. I mean, it's coming to the top. And so that fight has been whether or not we're going to allow these guys initially to drill these long laterals. Secondarily, if you harm us, then compensate us for it. And thirdly, the big boys didn't even want that. And they were able last year in the legislature to force legislation through to say basically, to heck with you little vertical boys. And they've left it up to the Corporation Commission to set the rules and the standards for that. Guess who has more influence with the Corporation Commission now? 80%, the big money, versus the smaller boys. You see what I'm trying to say? Which is one of the reforms that they've opposed. So as punishment, and I believe, trust me, I've had many conversations with many oil men over this, and Mike Cantrell, who's the leader of the small vertical boys, has been a good friend of OCPAC and a good friend of mine, and he's been here. As punishment to these big boys, they started an initiative petition to just make it 7% for everybody at all times. So guess what that did? That brought these oil boys who have, the big horizontal boys, who have fought tooth and nail to keep from raising the gross production tax, all of a sudden to join StepUp Oklahoma and propose 4%. So it doesn't go to 7. Okay? Now, through lots of negotiations here, and it's not the article that I brought today, but through lots of negotiations now, these small vertical boys with that initiative petition in process right now have got these guys by the throat. And so now they are agreeing to back off of a government appointee of Corporation Commission, leave it alone as elections, and several of the other things. There's more technical things. So that's why the big oil boys have come to the table now, is to keep that from happening. Now let me tell you why gross production tax is such a bad tax. Okay? You have to understand something. A normal businessman, a typical business, if you raise the tax on that business, and as long as all their competitors have the same tax raised on them, they simply raise the price of their goods and services because that tax is an overhead to them. They simply raise that their price, to cover that additional overhead. But here's why it's bad for gross production tax. Number one, oil and gas men do not get to control their prices. Their prices are set worldwide, and it's truly a supply and demand thing. Number one. Number two, gross production taxes are a tax that you pay on every barrel of oil that comes out of the ground, or every cubic foot of gas that comes out of the ground. That's a certain percentage you pay on that before you even get to count 1 penny of your expenses. Regardless of how much it costs you. You can lose money on that and still have to pay that. And so the oil and gas business is a very capital intensive business. So when you go for a gross production tax, you're harming the industry is what you're doing. But you know what? That's a tax the people will never pay out of their own pocket, except for the jobs they lose when they work for oil and gas companies. But that's not a tax that you pay out of your pocket like any other tax that's out there. And so that's why you see this is January 19th. Excuse me. This is January 26th. Baker Hughes to close many of its Oklahoma locations. I haven't seen today's front page of the Oklahoman, but I'm going to bet you above the fold, top story, if anybody's seen it, Chesapeake lays off several hundred. Okay. Well, they said that on the news yesterday, but today will be the first day it's in the paper. I'm going to bet it's on the front page. Do you understand what I'm saying? Our legislature and StepUp Oklahoma is created, and I'll tell you why it's created, the whole thing here. They are moving us toward a state that is unbusiness friendly and a state that is higher cost, and they are going to do harm to our future economy the direction that they're going. And they're doing this all in the name of paying teachers more money. Now let me just say this. And we've done this. We've gone through this. We've compared teacher salaries and things like this. Teachers are not underpaid. You have to understand that. They are not underpaid. The NEA is orchestrating the biggest scam in America, where they're working one state against another. Today, if we raise our teacher salary by $5,000 a year, which will be $1,500 a year above the regional average, with a state that has the lowest cost of living in the region, being Oklahoma, you will be paying teachers too much in Oklahoma if you do that. And
it works the same way in every state in the region.
It works
because they're all
the same
saying
way.
The same thing.
My
We
wife-
want to make the regional average, so
my
everybody
wife
raises
and I
it.
do 15 to 25 states a year. And we do that on road trips most of the time. And while we're in motels and different places or visiting somebody, I'm always watching the local news. Guess what you hear? The same thing you hear, we've got to pay teachers more. We've got to pay teachers more. Doesn't matter where you go, we've got to pay teachers more. Now, we do have a teacher shortage problem. And I want to tell you why we have a teacher shortage problem. I've encountered this myself. And we saw it in the newspaper just recently with the superintendent of the cash schools. Young people who are thinking about going into the teaching profession have heard how bad the pay is and how difficult it is, and they believe the lie, and they're making the choice. See, it's a self-inflicted problem of the teacher shortage. Here's the the superintendent of the cash schools talking about his son, who did mission work, youth work. He's great with kids, wanted to be a teacher. He's at college somewhere, didn't mention where, working to be a teacher, works part-time at Chicken Express. So he calls his dad, and he says, "Dad, what is the starting teacher pay for a teacher?" His dad says, $32,000 a year. It's actually 31 something. $32,000 a year. And the kid says, "Well, that isn't that much more than I make here at Chicken Express." Now, folks, if you're an advocate for not having shortage of teachers, like his father should be, you're going to tell the rest of the story. And here's the rest of the story. If that kid at Chicken Express working a full-time job there, not in management, is making $10 an hour, and I'm not sure he's making that much. He's making about $20,000 a year. Okay? But you know what? He has to do that in 250 days of 8 hours a day to make that $20,000 a year. The teacher at $32,000 a year works 180 days a year. And the minimum 35-hour work week. Now let's go look at something else.
With excellent benefits.
Yes.
And
yes.
time off.
Yes. And actually so here's the thing. If you're working at Chicken Express and you're not in management, how much do you think your pay increase is going to be after your first year there? Zip? You mean you can't expect a raise there? And at the second year, third, fourth, and fifth? But you see, if that father would have told his son the truth, starts off at 32, it's $12,000 a year more for much less work that you have to do. And by the way, you will get a salary increase every single year for the first 15 years you're teaching. That is state law, says that has to happen. So, is it better to work as a teacher than work at Chicken Express? And you have to understand, teachers, the average salary of a teacher in the state of Oklahoma is $10,000 a year more than the average salary of people in the private sector. So every time you raise taxes to give teachers more, John talked about smoking people being poor. Guess who it hits harder than anyone else? Poor and lower middle class people that are struggling to make it. They're making it out there at $30,000 a year, $35,000 a year, so that average teacher salary can go from $45,000 to now $50,000 a year if you do a $5,000 across-the-board pay increase.
Charlie, was it House Bill 1017 that required everyone have to get paid the same those first 15 years? That whole union negotiation.
Here's what HB 1017 did. And that was the largest, most significant education reform bill ever. And that was passed 1990, 1991, something like that.
About the same time we put that state question that Georgia Williams talked about.
Right, it was all at the state time. It passed first. It was held open for months trying to get the emergency clause passed on it. Finally, 2 Republican senators caved and the emergency clause was added to it. Here's why it was important. Number one, it doubled the number of signatures required to bring that bill to a vote of the people for repeal. And number two, it immediately started all the new taxes, revenues, teacher pay increases, and things like that. And here's the effect of it. Early polling showed about 60% of the people in the state of Oklahoma were against HB 1017. But by the time we gathered the signatures to bring it to a vote of the people, and by the time the vote could be taken, it had already been in operation for a year. So you had a lot of people out there who were initially against it, now thought the kids were dependent upon it, and thought if we pulled it away from them, it would hurt the kids. And that's how it passed with a 54 to 46% vote. However, that was State Question 639. It failed. State Question 640, which was the one that Georgia
requires a 75% supermajority
requires a
to pass
75%.
taxes.
Yes, and you left something out real important that you don't hear anybody talking about. The reason they're wanting to repeal 640 is because they say we've never raised tax in the state legislature a single time since its passing. And that's true with the tax, not a fee increase. But you know what? There's something else in that bill. Or go to a vote of the people. So if they can't raise the tax, let them send it to the people. Let the people vote on it to see if they want the tax increase or not.
But what they have done is raise fees on anything and everything, and they've created new fees. And the other loophole they've discovered is that if there is an existing tax statute, they will expand it. They'll say, oh, well, this was already passed. This was already authorized. So we'll just use this mechanism here that we did vote on and just use it to leverage more money out of you.
Yeah, what they've done is a fee increase only only needs a simple majority to pass, whereas the tax increase doesn't. So they've raised all kinds of additional revenue. Been doing this for years, ever since the passage of it, calling it a fee. And
okay,
so
hold that thought.
Okay.
Because we've run out of time. We didn't get to any of the other stuff that I wanted to get to today, so we'll just pick this up at the next convenient opportunity. Taking it back to big principles just for a second, let's say for the sake of argument that some teachers did need to make some more money.
Some do.
And some do, right? But we have a bad system. We have a system that indiscriminately throws money at a lot of people across the board without any sort of discussion of who deserves it, where, and why. So the basic problem is they want to raise taxes. They want more money to give indiscriminately to everyone. So if you can find a way to help some teachers get more money, we're not opposed to that if they need more money. We're just opposed to raising taxes to do it when we know there's plenty of waste and other ways to find the money. And we're opposed to giving it to people indiscriminately because then that doesn't help with competition or better outcomes, which is critically important. Now, we didn't even have a Department of Education until 1971. We were educating students before that. In fact, in the Constitution, the only state employee that is mandated is a superintendent of public instruction. So let's just get rid of the Department of Education and all that money that's saved in the bureaucracy and send it back to the districts. The real answer is to fundamentally change the way we fund the thing. Send all the money down to the districts and you let them decide everything. Let them decide how much to pay the teachers and they can figure out who needs the raise and give it to them. Okay, so let's wrap this up. You were talking about not having seen the Daily Oklahoman and if there's any new information. They did just publish an op-ed from Tom Coburn, of all people, who's out there saying, we don't need to raise taxes. That stifles the economy. That kills productivity.
That's what I'm trying
to say. It makes us less competitive. So even Coburn is out there saying that in the Daily Oklahoman. Now, we haven't mentioned the State of the Union address today. So
I didn't watch
parting remark. Yeah, I didn't watch it either. I think it's slightly less important than the Super Bowl on Sunday, frankly. It's just kind of a big, everybody's watching it, but what difference does it really make? Hey, this has been fun. See you all next week at the Capitol.